Hello and welcome back. We are continuing off, at least in form and style, from the Mesopotamian Pantheon video I did earlier this week. But this time, we are going to go through the main deities of the Egyptian Pantheon. Of course, we're not going to be doing every single one of them, but we will be explaining the main ones that pop up. As always, if you like what you hear, the best way to express it is by clicking the like and subscribe, but you already knew that. So with that all being said, and with buttons clicked well and truly, let's begin. And what better place to begin? With Ra, also known as Re, depending on where you read it. Now let's explain in general the form and function of Ra. Now, Ra was one of the most central deities in the Egyptian pantheon, and his iconography reflects this importance. He was typically depicted as a man with the head of a falcon, crowned with a sun disk, encircled by the Uraeus, that is the Greek rendering of the name. You might recognize this object. It is a sacred cobra attached above the head, symbolizing sovereignty, divine authority, and, of course, most importantly, protection. Nothing protects you like a big angry snake in front of your forehead. Now, the sun disk itself was a powerful symbol of life, warmth, and creation. In some representations, Ra appeared as a full-bodied falcon, without any real human features, emphasizing his dominion over the vast sky. But occasionally, he is also shown as a man, but with a ram's head, and this is particularly when associated with the sun's journey through the underworld during the night, showing his regenerative aspects. But of course, the visual representations extended beyond these forms. He was sometimes depicted as a scarab beetle named Khepri, symbolizing the morning sun and rebirth. Now, of course, this is because the scarab has a habit of rolling dung balls. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, these little balls of dung are kind of a metaphor for the sun moving across the sky. Which is, well, interesting to say the least. Now, at sunset, Ra was represented as an elderly man, or in another name, Atum, that is the creator god, signifying the sun's descent and transition to the underworld. Of course, lots of varied forms of Ra across this vast breadth of time in which he was observed and worshipped in different ways. And all these forms just illustrate his all-encompassing nature and his presence in, well, every aspect of the sun's cycle, from dawn till dusk. Now, as for the function of Ra, what does he actually do? Well, of course, he was the preeminent sun god, embodying the physical sun itself and its life-giving energy. Now, the sun, of course, in many cultures, predating most of our religions to this day, have sun worship as the main characteristic. Of course, why would you not worship the sun? Its warmth, it gives life to all the plants, it gives light to the earth, so it only makes sense. Now, Ra in general is believed to be the creator of all forms of life, and that includes humans and the other gods, through his emanation of this life-breathing energy, this primordial heat. Now, in terms of the myths, Ra emerged from this primordial chaos, these waters of Nun, creating himself and then other gods through his spoken word, or in some versions through masturbation, highlighting his self-generative power. Well, each day Ra sailed across the sky in his solar bark, known to the Egyptians as the Manjet, the boat of millions of years, illuminating the world and sustaining its life. But at night, he journeyed through the underworld in the Mesektet bark, where he faced numerous dangers, of course, particularly the serpent Apep, known to the Greeks as Apophis. Now, I do mention the Greek translations because much of what we have in terms of primary observations on Egypt comes from the early Ptolemaic kingdom, or just in general, we have things from Herodotus and Diodorus Siculus, historians like this who primarily wrote in Greek. So we will be using some names interchangeably, but we'll be using both as much as we can. Now, this serpent, Apep, Apophis, embodied chaos and sought to prevent the sun's rebirth, chasing Ra throughout the underworld. Of course, that was a bit of a fight on its own. Ra's nightly victory over Apophis, or Apep, ensured that the sun would rise again, and Ma'at was maintained, Ma'at being the cosmic order in the Egyptian spiritual tradition. Now, Ra's function, of course, extended to the political sphere too, where he was considered the divine father of the pharaohs themselves. Pharaohs were often referred to as the sons of Ra, linking their authority directly to the deity and legitimizing their rule. Is this kind of divine sanction. Of course, who would argue with the ruler if he was ordained by the gods themselves? Kind of hard to go against that. Now, temples dedicated to Ra, such as the Sun temples at Heliopolis, which in Greek means the city of the sun, Helios meaning sun, Polis meaning city, were centers of religious worship and astronomical observation, which was, of course, just as important in the Egyptian tradition as it was in the earlier Mesopotamian and contemporary Mesopotamian traditions around this subject. Now, priests, they performed rituals to honor Ra, including reciting hymns, and they also conducted ceremonies to aid him on his daily journey, making sure that the sun rises again, and of course, that cosmic order of Ma'at is once again balanced out. Now, in terms of Ra's integration with other deities, well, that also reflects his universal significance. He merged with Amun to become Amun-Ra, combining his solar attributes with Amun's hidden and transcendent qualities. Now, as Ra-Horakti, he fused with Horus, emphasizing his role as a sky god and reinforcing the pharaoh's divine right to rule. Of course, you'll see Ra everywhere in Egyptian art, architecture, and literature, permeating every aspect of daily life, and, of course, afterlife beliefs too. Well, he was often invoked, of course, for protection and guidance when push comes to shove and people close their eyes never to wake up again. Ra is the one you want on your side. Pray that he's there when you need him. Now, on to God number 2. That is, of course, Osiris. I'm sure you've heard of him. Now, usually Osiris is depicted as a mummified pharaoh, signifying his association with death and resurrection. And you might notice in the depictions of him that he wears this grand crown, this tall white headdress adorned with ostrich feathers on either side. Well, that is called the Atef crown. That is Atef, and it symbolizes Upper Egypt and divine authority. Of course, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt were separated into these two different distinctions. Basically, Egypt is organized into its distinctions, in these classical times at least, by the flow of the Nile. But, don't get confused, Upper Egypt is actually to the south, whereas Lower Egypt is actually to the north. And the reason for this is because the flow of the Nile actually flows south. That is why it's Upper and Lower Egypt are that way. At least that is my understanding of it. Now, back to Osiris. In his hands, which were crossed over his chest in his depictions, he held the crook and flail. Now, these are, of course, traditional symbols of kingship, fertility, and also shepherding. His skin was often painted green or black, and the green represented regeneration, vegetation, and rebirth. Of course, the color of healthy vegetation being a vibrant green, but the black symbolized the fertile silt of the Nile and the concept of resurrection. Now, the Nile being, of course, extremely important, the Egyptians relied on the yearly inundations, the floods of the Nile, to irrigate their crops and have a good harvest. Signs of a poor inundation may lead people to think that the gods were not pleased with them. Better put on another festival. Now, Osiris's mummy wrappings left his hands free, indicating his ability to interact with the living and the dead. In some representations, Osiris was shown with a beard styled in the fashion of pharaohs, further emphasizing his royal status and just another connection to his earthly counterparts. Now, the hieroglyphs and tomb paintings that we have, which are so lovingly still there for us, very fortunate for that, frequently depicted scenes of Osiris presiding over the afterlife, often seated on a throne within a pavilion, reinforcing his role as the judge of the dead. No doubt you've seen the papyrus of Hunefer from the Book of the Dead. I've probably used it on the thumbnail, with a very famous scene where Hunefer is led to meet Osiris and be judged on whether he can, be deemed a good or a bad soul. So, of course, Osiris was this god of the afterlife, but also agriculture, resurrection, and fertility. And you'll find that fertility gods are extremely common, gods, goddesses, and some of them kind of intersect, but we will get to that. There's a few more we have to get to before we talk about those sorts of things. Now, central to Egyptian mythology is his story of betrayal, death, and rebirth, which served as a metaphor for the cycles of nature and just general human existence. So, according to the myth, Osiris was a just and wise king who taught humanity agricultural and civilized practices. But he had a brother, Set, and he was a jealous brother. He was driven by this jealousy and desire for power to murder Osiris by trapping him in a decorated coffin and throwing it into the Nile. But that wasn't the end of Osiris. Isis, Osiris's devoted wife, searched tirelessly for his body, and finally, she found it. Upon finding it, Set, dismembered Osiris into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Well, Isis was undeterred. with the help of her sister Nephthys and other deities like Thoth and Anubis, she located and reassembled all the little pieces of Osiris's body. Now you must remember, Isis had incredible magical abilities, and she resurrected him long enough to conceive their son Horus. There are different tales of that story of the conception. Some say that she just fashioned the specific part that she needed and left the rest by the wayside and did the job herself. I won't go into a great explanation of that one. You can use your imagination. Well, after this, regardless of how it went, Osiris then descended to the underworld, where he took up his new role as the Lord and the Judge of the dead. Quite a career change, isn't it? Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Now, we have something in the Egyptian tradition called the weighing of the heart ceremony in the Hall of Mart. Now, this is where the hearts of the deceased were basically plucked out and weighed against the feather of Mart. Now, Mart, of course, was the goddess of truth and justice. Now, a heart that was lighter than the feather allowed the soul to enter the afterlife. And of course, if you got to go there, well, that's a life lived in harmony with cosmic order to thank for that one. But, of course, Osiris was also the agricultural deity, intimately connected with the fertility of the land. His death and resurrection paralleled the annual flooding of the Nile, which deposited rich silt onto the farmlands. And silt means that the crops can grow. Of course, festivals in Osiris's honor included planting ceremonies, where all those grains were germinated in Osiris-shaped molds. Well, his ability to overcome death, of course, provided hope to the Egyptians for their own afterlife. I mean, if Osiris can do it, why not me? He exemplified the possibility of an eternal life, encouraging adherence to that cosmic order of Mart and proper funerary practices. Osiris's worship included elaborate rituals, temple ceremonies, and mysterious plays that reenacted his myth. The city of Abydos became a significant cult center, attracting pilgrims seeking his blessings. His legacy influenced Egyptian concepts such as kingship, morality, and the afterlife, reinforcing the interconnectedness of life, death, and ultimately, rebirth. Okay, now we turn to Isis. Now, Isis was one of the most venerated goddesses, known for her protective and nurturing qualities. Kind of like a mum, if you want to put it that way. Now, she was commonly depicted as a woman wearing a throne-shaped headdress of sorts, symbolizing her name in hieroglyphs and her role as the seat of the pharaoh's power. In later periods, she was shown with a cow horns encircling a sun disk, linking her to another god, Hathor, a kind of maternal goddess as well, and emphasizing her significance in the cosmos. Isis was often portrayed with outstretched wings, signifying her protective nature, especially in funerary contexts where she guarded the deceased. Now, in scenes depicting the resurrection of Osiris or the protection of Horus, she was sometimes shown as a kite, which is a type of bird, not the kind of kite you fly in the park. Now, this shows her role in breathing life into her husband and safeguarding her son. Iconography also included representations of Isis nursing the infant Horus. emphasizing her role again as a mother goddess and reinforcing that divine right of kings, as pharaohs, by the way, were considered the earthly embodiment of Horus. Now, there is another function of Isis, which is very interesting, I think, because she's seen as this goddess of magic and healing and protection, but also motherhood. Definitely that wise old figure. Now, her story is central to the Egyptian mythology too. Of course, we've already spoken about her a little bit in the Osiris section, and her story encompasses those themes of devotion, cunning, and power. Of course, as we've mentioned, after the murder of Osiris, she exemplified her perseverance by searching tirelessly for his body and using her magical abilities to resurrect him. Her magic was said to be unparalleled, stemming from her knowledge of secret names and spells. Pretty cool, isn't it? Well, as the mother of Horus, she protected him from Set's attempts to kill him. That was during his childhood too, which is pretty monstrous. Of course, this all happened in the swamps of the Nile Delta where this battle was going on. Her protective spells and cunning ensured the survival of Horus, which eventually allowed him to avenge his father. Now, she was called upon also by those seeking healing and protection. Her magic was believed to cure the sick and also to protect the vulnerable. The old myths tell of her acquiring the secret name of Ra, granting her immense power. Now, her maternal qualities extended beyond Horus, of course. Not just her own son, but everyone in Egypt was kind of like her child. Of course, she's the mother of Egypt, so of course they would be. She was seen as this compassionate deity who listened to the prayers of the common people, offering solace and assistance in bad times. And thus, when bad times become the worst of times, she offers her role in funerary rituals, helping to resurrect Osiris, of course, and by extension, aiding the deceased in their journey to the afterlife. She was associated with these rituals of mummification and ultimately the protection of the dead from the evil forces, getting them where they need to go. Kind of like an outstretched hand. Don't worry, I'll take you to the Hall of Mart. Of course, you might have heard of Isis's worship extending beyond Egypt, and that is true, with her cult spreading throughout the Mediterranean world during the Hellenistic and Roman periods. Now, Hellenistic being Greek, of course. Hellas is what the Greeks call their country. Now, temples dedicated to her were established in places like Philae, Delos, and Pompeii. Festivals in her honor also celebrated her virtues, and initiates participated in mystery cults that promised personal salvation and also eternal life. Isis's enduring legacy just shows this multifaceted nature as a goddess of profound power, compassion, and also universality. Kind of like a one-stop shop if you want to do some serious prayer. And so, of course, with those three out of the way, we arrive to Horus. Now, he's primarily depicted as a falcon, or at least a man with the head of a falcon. Pretty common in Egyptian iconography to have this half-half situation. Now, this shows his dominion over the sky and his keen vision, and he often wore the double crown of Egypt, which is the red crown of Lower Egypt and the white crown of Upper Egypt, showing his rule over a now unified land. His headdress reinforced his association with national sovereignty and kingship. Now, just a quick note, this isn't about the Egyptian gods, but you might have seen a very famous stele called the Narmer palette, being King Narmer bludgeoning the unfortunate king of the other side with a big club and taking the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt for himself. This kind of goes back to that divine right of kings wearing the hat, and if you've got the right hat, then you're the one in charge. Funny how it works that way. But if you look up the Narmer palette, you'll see what I mean. Now, in artistic representations, Horus's right eye was associated with the sun, that's being the eye of Ra, and his left eye with the moon, the eye of Horus. So do remember, the sun is the eye of Ra, the moon is the eye of Horus. Of course, this is meant to represent the celestial body's cyclical nature. Now, the eye of Horus, or the Wedjat, became a powerful protective symbol, representing healing, protection, and restoration. It's commonly used in amulets, jewelry, and funerary items. Now, Horus was the god of the sky, kingship, and protection, and war. As the son of Osiris and Isis, his mythological narrative centers on avenging his father's death and restoring order to Egypt. Now, as an action movie before the action movies were even a thing, if you ask me, it's a cool origin story. Now, after reaching adulthood, Horus challenged Set for the throne, leading to a series of battles known as the contendings of Horus and Set. These stories symbolize the struggle between the order and chaos, ultimately resulting in Horus's victory and the establishment of rightful rule. So, the living pharaoh was considered the embodiment of Horus on earth, ensuring the deity's continual presence in human affairs, a wise guiding hand. This association legitimized the pharaoh's authority and connected the monarch to a divine will. Now, Horus's martial aspects were emphasized in his battle against Set, so it also became kind of a god of war and hunting. Thus, he was invoked for protection in warfare and was believed to grant strength and courage to warriors. As the personification of the sky, Horus's eyes represented the sun and moon, and his wings spanned the heavens. His role explained celestial phenomena and reinforced the belief in a divinely ordered universe. And thus, this eye of Horus symbolizes restoration and wholeness, stemming from the myth where Set damaged Horus's eye during their conflict. Thoth healed the eye, and its restoration became a metaphor for healing and restoration of Ma'at. The Wedjat was used in rituals, amulets, and architecture to ward off evil and bring good fortune. Temples dedicated to Horus, such as the Temple of Edfu, served as an important religious centers. Rituals and festivals celebrated his victories and reinforced the pharaoh's divine connection. Horus's influence permeated legal and moral codes, justice, leadership, and of course, always balance. And just like that, we arrive at Set, who is also known as Seth. So if you hear both of them, you're talking about the same god. Now, typically he's depicted as a man with the head of a unique enigmatic creature known as the Set animal or typhonic beast. This composite animal had a long curved snout, square-tipped ears, and a slender canine body, along with a forked tail. Doesn't sound like one of the good guys, doesn't it? Now, the exact species remains unidentified, but it may incorporate features of an aardvark, a jackal, a donkey, or a fennec fox. Now, if you don't know what a fennec fox is, look that one up. Quite an interesting animal. Now, this ambiguity shows Set's association with the unknown, chaos, but also foreign lands, which is important, because of course, foreign lands imply a threat. Well, at least in the old days. It's the fear of the unknown. Now, in some representations, Set appeared as a full set animal, and occasionally as a hippopotamus or a crocodile, creatures linked to destructive forces. You might not think of a hippopotamus as destructive, but the hippopotamus kills more people in Africa than any other animal. I'm not joking. And if you're surprised to find that out, don't worry. I was equally as surprised when I found it out. So, hippopotamuses, stay away from them. Just a quick note too, hippopotamus actually means river horse in Greek, just before I forget. So that's in case that comes up in trivia for you. Now back to Set. His skin was sometimes shown in red, and this is important because in the Egyptian tradition, that is a color associated with disorder and malevolence, and also the desert. Now, of course, Set was the god of chaos, deserts, storms, violence, and foreign lands. His complex character encompassed both negative and protective aspects. Now, his most famous myth, of course, is the one we've mentioned, him murdering his own brother, consumed by envy and ambition, wanting to usurp the throne, and therefore plunging Egypt into turmoil and chaos. The subsequent battles with Horus for the control of Egypt is just another way of that eternal struggle between order, the mart, and chaos. So, there was this personification of disorder. Set represented the unpredictability and destructive forces of nature, such as desert winds and storms. He embodied the dangers of the desert, a stark contrast to the fertile Nile Valley. And I will remind you that the climate of Egypt back in the day was a little bit different. Don't think of Egypt as this desert. Yes, there's a lot of desert in there, the Sinai Peninsula and all the rest. But the Nile, that's a different sort of thing, especially back in those days when the climate was not as dry. Well, back to Set. Despite his chaotic nature, you might be surprised that Set actually played a vital role in defending the sun god Ra during his nightly journey through the underworld. You see, Set stood at the prow of Ra's bark, battling the serpent Apophis to ensure the sun's rebirth. This protective aspect is a little bit interesting, isn't it? It shows that he has this kind of duality within his character. And also we have mentioned this situation of being the god of foreigners and distant lands. Now, that is a reflection on Egypt's interaction with neighboring cultures. And it's kind of this fear and respect for his power over these realms. Now you think about it, a good foreign power is the kind of one that buys your copper, gives you new technologies, trades with you, things like this. Well, it's good if Set brings you one of them. But a bad foreign power, well, you know what happens with bad foreign powers, don't you? Now, in the Egyptian world view, Set's existence was of course essential to maintaining the balance. You can't have good without evil, kind of evil without good, light without shadow, quiet without noise. But then again, where do we draw this line between good and evil? It's very hard to make that distinction. These kind of labels are a little bit unproductive when we talk about these sorts of spiritual traditions. Of course, Set's worship due to this varied throughout Egyptian history. In some periods, he was actually quite revered and even had big temples dedicated just to him, such as the one in the city of Ombos. But in other times, especially during times of foreign occupations, let's think of the Hyksos, for example, Set was vilified and associated with enemy rulers. Of course, rituals often aim to appease Set's destructive tendencies or harshness for his strength for protection. Kind of like saying, please don't hurt us, have a few little gifts from us. Not really a very healthy relationship. But hey, that's just the way it is. Well, now with the big five out of the way, we get to Anubis, or Anubis, however you want to pronounce it. Now, Anubis was depicted as a man with the head of a jackal, or as a full black jackal. Now, the jackal is important because of its association with cemeteries and tombs due to its habits of scavenging, and Anubis's black coloration represented both the decay of the body but also the fertile soil of the Nile Valley. Once again, rebirth symbolism. Now his ears, I'm sure you'll notice, are quite alert, pricked up like he's heard some sound at distance. His gaze was always forward and just signifies his vigilance, always watching, always listening, ready to go at any moment. Now Anubis was often shown holding a flail or a was scepter, representing his authority and dominion over the underworld. Now in scenes depicting the embalming process, he was portrayed attending to the mummy, demonstrating his role again in mummification and protection of the dead. You will see this once again in the Papyrus of Hunefer and related materials from the Book of the Dead. Of course, Anubis was the god of mummification, embalming, and the afterlife. His primary function was to guide souls into the afterlife and protect graves from desecration. Anubis played a crucial role in the funerary practices too that were central to Egyptian religion. Now, quick one about the grave desecration. Egyptians in tradition were often buried with quite a good few valuables. And when times get tough, people make their money in whatever way they can. You can see where I'm going with this. Now, we're very lucky that, things like Tutankhamun, discovered by Howard Carter in, I believe, 1912. We're very lucky to have these sorts of things because most of the graves and tombs were simply robbed over the years, especially in times when of the Islamic conquests. I mean, the pyramids themselves used to be capped with gold, and they used to be white. All of that was taken away, robbed. Well, at least we still have the bones of the pyramids left to marvel at. It's still impressive. Now back to Anubis. Now he oversaw the embalming process, we know that, but he was also believed to have invented the entire thing. Of course, he invented the mummification process to preserve Osiris's body after his death. And then, of course, it got taught to humans and the traditions continued. Now, Anubis guided the souls of the deceased after this mummification process through the underworld. Come with me, and I will take you to the Hall of Mot for your judgment. Now, in the weighing of the heart ceremony, which we've briefly talked about, Anubis placed the deceased's heart on a scale balanced against a feather of Mot, and he monitored the scales for fairness, ensuring that the judgment was a just and fair one. Now, Thoth, who we're about to get to, recorded the outcome, and Osiris was the final one who made the decision. So, the cult of Anubis was, of course, widespread, and his images adorned tombs and sarcophagi. Priests wore Anubis masks during the embalming rituals to embody the presence of the god, kind of like a role play. Amulets bearing his likeness were common too, serving as talismans for protection and guidance. Anubis's role reinforced the importance of these proper funerary rites and ethical living to achieve a favorable afterlife. Of course, you don't want to have the awkward moment when Anubis is leading you to the weighing of the heart ceremony, both of you knowing full well that it's not going to work out well for you. Now, next one, we have Thoth, who was depicted as a man with the head of an ibis, which was a bird associated with wisdom, knowledge, and also writing, due to its methodical movements along the Nile's banks. Now, alternatively, believe it or not, he was shown as a hulking great baboon. Don't know why, a little bit less graceful than the ibis, but the baboon was another sacred animal linked to intelligence and the moon. In his hands, Thoth often held a scribe's palette and a stylus, emphasizing his role as the divine scribe helping out Osiris. He sometimes carried the Ankh too. Now that is that cross with the circle on top of it. Excuse the poor imagery there I tried to describe. You know the one I mean. Now this Ankh was symbolizing life, and he also had that same was scepter representing his power. So, 1 + 1 = 2, we see that we represent the power over life with this imagery. Now, Thoth was also associated with the moon too, depicted wearing a lunar crescent on his head, or with a lunar disk, showing his role in regulating time and seasons. Now, since he was the god of reason, he was also the one of writing, science, mathematics, art, magic, and the moon. He was considered the scribe of the gods, responsible for recording all events, all decrees, and all judgments. Must have a sore wrist at the end of that, I think. Now, Thoth was credited with creating the hieroglyphs, enabling communication and record keeping. And thus, of course, he was the patron of scribes, who sought his favor for skill and accuracy. Thoth presided over intellectual pursuits, including mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and law, and he was believed to have invented the 365-day calendar, adjusting it little by little to align with different celestial movements. Of course, much of the encounters with the Egyptians. From the Romans and the Greeks, this cultural exchange really helped with the knowledge that the Egyptians brought to the table. Now, Thoth played a crucial role in mediating the disputes among the gods, notably the big one between Horus and Set. Now, his wisdom ensured that conflicts were resolved justly with maintenance of Mart, and as a lunar deity, he regulated the passage of time, the phases of the moon, and the seasons, of course vital for agriculture and religious festivals. Now we already know that during this weighing of the heart ceremony that Thoth was responsible for recording all of the results and handing them over to Osiris. Of course, remember that Osiris had the ultimate say in things, but in terms of paperwork, Thoth was the guy to see. And so his influence extended to education and the arts. Schools, libraries, they were under his patronage, and scholars invoked his name for inspiration. Festivals celebrated his contributions to knowledge and maintaining the cosmic order, and thus Thoth's legacy emphasized the value of wisdom and that pursuit of learning, but also, remember, the ethical application of knowledge. For what good is knowledge if you use it for a vile purpose? And now we have Hathor. Hathor was depicted in various forms. She often appeared as a woman with cow horns cradling a sun disk between them, symbolizing her role as a sky goddess and having a maternal nature. The cow, of course, was sacred to her, representing nourishment and motherhood. So sometimes she was depicted entirely as a cow, or as simply as a woman with cow ears. In artistic depiction, she's shown holding a sistrum, that is a musical instrument associated with festivals and religious rituals. She was also portrayed with a menat necklace, symbolizing fertility, rebirth, and divine protection. Now, Hathor was the goddess of love, beauty, music, dance, joy, and of course, once again, fertility. She embodied the feminine aspects of the divine and was revered as a mother goddess. Her functions included the patroness of women and motherhood. She protected women during childbirth and was invoked for fertility and maternal care. Of course, this means for both gods and humans. And she became a kind of role model for femininity. Hathor also presided over festivities, bringing joy and harmony. Music and dance were integral to her worship, believed to appease the gods and promote the balance of Mart. Now, as the mistress of the West, Hathor welcomed the dead into the afterlife, offering comfort and protection. She was associated with the Milky Way, considered the Nile of the heavens. Hathor represented aesthetic qualities too, inspiring art, poetry, and romance. She was a muse for creativity and passion. Connected to the Sinai Peninsula's turquoise mine, she was also known as the Lady of the Turquoise. Thus, she safeguarded miners and travelers, bridging the gap between Egypt and distant lands. Festivals in her honor were lively and communal, featuring music, dancing, and processions, a good time to be had by all. The Temple of Hathor at Dendera was a significant cult center, with elaborate decorations celebrating her myths. Seems like the most fun of the deities to worship, that's for sure. Next up, we have Ptah, that is spelled P-E-A-H. Now, Ptah was depicted as a mummified man, showing his connection to creation and the afterlife. He wore this rather tight-fitting cloak with only his hands visible, holding a composite scepter that combined three powerful symbols. First, the Was, power and dominion, the Ankh, life, and the Jed, stability. The scepter showed his mastery over these fundamental aspects of existence. Now, you'll see on his head that it's adorned with a skull cap or a close-fitting cap, and he sometimes had a straight, false beard, depending on which depiction you'll see, which distinguishes him from the curled beards of other gods. Now, in some representations, he was associated with the sacred bull Apis, considered an incarnation of Ptah on earth. He was the god of craftsmen, architects, builders, and creation. Centered in the city of Memphis, he was revered as the patron deity of artisans and those who shaped the physical world. Ptah was believed to have conceived the world through thought and brought into existence by speaking words. This concept emphasized the power of intellect and speech in creation. Of course, magic goes along with the magic words. Now, he also inspired creativity and skill in stonemasons, carpenters, metalworkers, and sculptors, and Egypt needs as many of them as it can get. Thus, workshops often invoked his name for excellence in craftsmanship. He oversaw the building of temples, monuments, structures, reflecting his role in shaping the culture of Egypt too. As a funerary god, Ptah was associated with the regeneration of the deceased, ensuring their rebirth in the afterlife, but not to the extent of the other gods. Now, his influence was most profound in Memphis, where his temple, Hut-ka-Ptah, mansion of the soul of Ptah, the Ka being the name for the soul in the Egyptian tradition, was a significant religious center. Now, the city's Greek name, Aegyptos, is believed to be derived from this temple's name, highlighting Ptah's importance. Festivals celebrated his creative power, and his priesthood held considerable sway. So, Ptah's legacy shows this value of intellect, craftsmanship, and the transformative power of creation. Alright, last one now. We have Amun. Now, Amun was depicted as a man wearing a crown with two plumes, symbolizing his dominion over the air and invisibility. He often held a scepter and an ankh, representing his authority and life, and in some representations, he appeared as a ram or a man with a ram's head. The ram's curved horns were emblematic of virility and strength. He was sometimes shown as a goose, or associated with a goose, earning him the epithet Great Cackler, linked to the creation myths where a cosmic egg hatches the universe. His representations emphasize his concealed yet omnipresent nature. Now, initially, he was just a local Theban deity, but with time he rose to national prominence, especially during the Middle and New Kingdoms. As his cult grew, he emerged with the sun god Ra to become Amun-Ra, embodying both the hidden and revealed aspects of the divine. Thus, he became the supreme deity, overseeing the Pantheon and embodying ultimate power, revered as a creator and sustainer of life. He represented the unseen forces of the world, such as air and wind. His name meant the Hidden One, emphasizing his mysterious and transcendent qualities. Now, Amun's rise paralleled the political ascendancy of his city Thebes. Pharaohs promoted his worship to unify Egypt and legitimize their rule, often depicting themselves as his chosen representatives on earth in the mortal capacity. In his aspect as a ram, Amun was associated with procreation and fertility, influencing agriculture and population growth. Now, if we talk about Thebes, which is modern-day Luxor, we can't go past the Karnak temple complex, perhaps the most famous of the temple complexes, and that was the epicenter of Amun's worship, one of the largest religious structures ever built, and it's extremely impressive. Take my word for it. It featured grand temples, obelisks, and avenues of sphinxes, reflecting his immense influence. Festivals like the Opet festival celebrated Amun's connection to the pharaoh and the renewal of his kingship. Thus, Amun's priesthood amassed significant wealth and power, sometimes rivaling the pharaoh's authority, which I'm sure you can imagine causes more than a few problems. But his worship extended beyond Egypt too, influencing neighboring cultures and becoming a symbol of this universal godhood. His legacy shows the interplay between religion, politics, and society, reinforcing that concept of divine kingship and, in general, the unity of a nation. And with that, we reach the end of our little video on the Egyptian Pantheon, at least in general. Now, of course, there's a lot more that we can go into, and in later videos we will be, but this should give you everything you need to know, at least at a cursory glance. So when you hear the name of a god come up, you can know who they are, what they do, and perhaps why they are there. Now I'm going to thank my top tier patrons and supporters: Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Aaron, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiano, Christine, Fizabo, Legitmus, Maverick, and Susan. Thank you very much. Now, Susan told me that she likes the way I say her name, so I'm going to say it like that every time now. Thank you very much, everyone. And let's all get a good rest, okay? Good night. Lots of love to you all.